I heard my son tell the doctor to let me die. Not in a dream, not in some fevered blur my frightened mind invented afterward. I heard him. Every word, every syllable, clear enough to feel it hit me like ice water down my spine. Stop the treatment. Then the doctor asked, calm but uncertain, "Are you sure?" And my son, my own son, didn't hesitate. Yes. Have you ever been trapped inside your own body and realized the person speaking for you might not be trying to save you at all? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. My name is Flora Cole. I was 70 years old when that happened, old enough to know what fear feels like, and old enough to know when something is deeply, terribly wrong. The room smelled like antiseptic and plastic tubing. The air was cold. Machines clicked and hummed somewhere near my bed, steady and detached, as if what was happening to me was just another shift, another chart, another tired conversation under fluorescent lights. I tried to open my eyes. I tried to move my hand. I tried to make any sound at all. Nothing. Inside, I was screaming. The strange thing is, the last thing I remembered before waking into that nightmare wasn't pain. It was my own kitchen floor, the yellow light over the sink, a mug still sitting out from tea gone cold. I had been dizzy for hours that morning, sweating one minute and shivering the next. I remember gripping the edge of the counter and telling myself not to be dramatic. 70 is not young, but it is not ancient either. I still lived alone, still paid my own bills, still kept tomato plants alive every summer in the backyard. I was not ready to be spoken about like I was already halfway gone. Before I collapsed, I had called my son Daniel. Daniel Cole, 42, efficient, reliable, everyone said. The kind of man who always sounded in control, even when he wasn't. He lived only 20 minutes away, closer than my daughter Nina, and for years I had told myself that mattered. Proximity becomes trust if you let it. Convenience starts to look like devotion. He came quickly that day. Too quickly, maybe. At the time, I was just relieved to hear his keys at the door. I remember him kneeling beside me, telling me not to try to stand, telling me help was coming. I remember the pressure of his hand on my shoulder. I remember wanting to believe, with the simple, foolish faith only a mother can still have, that when things got bad, her child would carry her through it. Now, I was lying in a hospital bed, listening to that same child tell a doctor to stop my treatment. A chair scraped lightly across the floor. Paper moved. Someone sighed. The doctor's voice came again, lower now. "Mrs. Cole still has options." Options. That word lit a spark inside me. Options meant I was not beyond saving. Options meant this was not some final, merciful decision after all hope was gone. Options meant my son was choosing something, choosing it while I was still in here, still hearing, still trying with every shred of strength I had left to claw my way back into my own body. I forced all my energy into my right hand. Nothing. Into my eyelids. Nothing. My chest tightened with panic. Was I sedated? Paralyzed? Too weak to respond? I didn't know, and that ignorance made it worse. I could hear my life being discussed as if I had already stepped out of it. Then Daniel spoke again, and what chilled me wasn't just the words, it was the tone. No trembling, no grief, no confusion, just control. "I know what she would want," he said. Would he? That question opened something dark inside me, because suddenly, little moments from the past few months began drifting up through the haze. Daniel asking about my paperwork. Daniel offering to help organize my legal documents. Daniel standing in my dining room 2 weeks earlier with a folder tucked under his arm, smiling too tightly as he said, "You really should get all this sorted out, Mom, just in case." Just in case. At the time, I signed 1 or 2 harmless forms and pushed the rest back toward him. I remember the flicker in his face then, disappointment quickly hidden. I remember him pressing harder than usual, saying hospitals ask for these things, that emergencies happen fast, that families need clarity. I remember telling him I'd review everything later, properly, when I wasn't tired. Had he let it go? Or had he simply waited? A soft set of footsteps crossed the room. A woman's voice, gentle, careful. Nurse Tessa Morales, though I didn't know her name yet. "I'd like to check her responsiveness again," she said. Daniel answered too quickly. "She's been like this." Been like this. That was the moment I stopped feeling only fear and started feeling betrayal. Sharp, clean, unmistakable. A mother knows her child's voices, the kind they use in public, the kind they use when they want sympathy, the kind they use when they're hiding something and praying no one looks too closely. I pushed again, this time with everything I had. A spark. Tiny. Painful. Then, from the corner of my eye, one tear slipped free and ran into my hairline. I heard the nurse pause, but before she could say anything, Daniel's voice cut through the room. "That reflex has been happening. It doesn't mean she's aware." Reflex. That one word told me everything. He was not confused. He was managing the room. And as the doctor hesitated, as papers shifted again and someone said they needed to review one more note before making changes, a terrible thought settled over me with perfect clarity. I was not just fighting whatever sickness had put me in that bed. I was fighting the story my own son was trying to tell about me. My son hadn't walked into that hospital confused. He had walked in prepared. That was the thought pounding through my head as I lay there, trapped behind my own stillness, listening to people decide what kind of woman I was, what kind of future I had, and whether I would be allowed to keep it. And once that thought took hold, other details started lining up behind it, ugly and sharp, like nails rising through old floorboards. Because preparation leaves a trail. Even before the ambulance came, Daniel had been moving through my house with a confidence that now made my stomach turn. At the time, I had barely been able to keep my eyes open. I was sweating through my blouse, my knees had given out, and the kitchen tiles felt like ice under my cheek. I remember hearing his footsteps going from room to room, drawers opening, closet doors sliding, the metal scrape of my file cabinet. Not panic, not scrambling, searching. I had told myself he was looking for my insurance card, my ID, maybe a list of medications. Sensible things, helpful things. That is what a good son does in an emergency, isn't it? That is the story I gave myself because the alternative felt too ugly to name. But now, replaying it from that hospital bed, I remembered how fast he found everything. Too fast. He knew exactly which drawer held my checkbook, exactly where I kept the folder with Martin's death certificate and the house deed, even the little tin where I tucked away spare keys and old passwords. I do not remember ever showing him all that. Nina never would have gone through my private things without asking. Daniel did it like he already considered them half his. That thought hurt. And pain has a way of dragging truth into the light. Daniel had always been the practical one. 42, divorced, polished when he wanted to be, good at sounding reasonable even when he was saying something that should have made people pause. My daughter Nina was 38, warmer, blunter, less smooth around the edges. She lived farther away, which made it easy for Daniel to cast himself as the one who truly showed up. He drove me to appointments sometimes, hello, with a loose gutter. Carried heavy boxes down to the basement. The kind of help that earns trust quickly and quietly. But trust is a dangerous thing when it goes unquestioned. Nina had tried to question it. I see that now. A month earlier, she had called and asked, very carefully, whether Daniel had been bringing up my finances more than usual. I laughed it off, told her he was just trying to help. She got quiet for a second, then said, "Mom, I know his tone. Just make sure helping is all it is." I didn't want to hear that. No mother wants to sit in the middle of her grown children and admit one of them might be circling her life like an opportunity. So I defended him. I said he had stress. Bills. His contracting business had slowed. The divorce had hit him hard. He was trying. That phrase mothers use when they cannot bear to say the harder one. He is changing. Now, in the hospital, I could hear him still trying to shape the room in his favor. At some point during intake, before I had gone fully under the fog of infection and medication, I remembered voices around me asking questions. Is she usually confused? Does she live alone? Any history of dementia? I had wanted to answer. I had answers. I read 3 novels a month. I balanced my own accounts. I still beat half my friends at crossword puzzles. But Daniel kept stepping in before I could gather enough breath. She's been declining. Her memory has been off. She gets overwhelmed easily. Small lies. Strategic lies. Not dramatic enough to sound evil, just enough to sand me down into someone more helpless, more fragile, more speakable for. Do you see how dangerous that is? Nobody needs a wild story if they can make you sound slightly less capable than you are. That is all it takes sometimes. Especially when you are old, especially when you are sick. Then came the word that changed everything. Proxy. I heard it through the haze like a bell underwater. Nurse Tessa asked whether there was an advance directive on file. Daniel answered before anyone else could speak. I'm her medical proxy. He said it with the confidence of a man handing over a driver's license. A pause followed. Paper rustled. Someone murmured something about signatures. Signed. That word struck me so hard I forgot, for a second, how weak I was. 2 weeks earlier, Daniel had stood at my dining table with that folder and those forms. Routine, he had called them. Easy. Smart. Necessary. I had signed only what I understood and pushed the rest back toward him. I knew I had. I remembered it clearly because he had smiled in that tight way of his afterward, the smile he wore when he was disappointed but trying not to show it. So what had he handed them? What exactly had he done with my name? The nurse asked another quiet question then, something about notifying my daughter before changing the treatment plan. And Daniel answered immediately, almost sharply. My sister doesn't need to be involved. Need. Such a revealing little word. Not, she's on her way. Not, we haven't reached her yet. Not even, I'll call her. Just a clean dismissal, as if Nina were a complication to manage instead of my child. Then he added, I'm handling this. And right there, flat on my back with fear pressing down on my chest, I felt the shape of the truth beginning to form. This wasn't panic. This wasn't grief. This was control. And when I heard someone say the paperwork appeared valid, something inside me went cold, because for the first time, I stopped wondering whether my son was making a terrible mistake, and started wondering whether he had planned this. Then I heard my daughter's name, and the lie he told about her. That was the moment my fear changed shape. Until then, I had still been holding on to one last hopeful idea. Maybe Daniel was scared, overwhelmed, in over his head. Maybe he was making bad decisions under pressure. Maybe this was panic dressed up as certainty. But lies reveal intention. And the second he used Nina's name to shut a door, I knew this wasn't just about me lying in that bed. It was about making sure the wrong people never got close enough to stop him. She and Mom haven't been close, Daniel said. A pause. Then, in that same smooth voice, he added, Nina gets emotional. She'll only make this harder. I wanted to scream, because it was false. Cleanly false. Nina and I talked every Sunday, and usually once or twice more during the week. She knew when I had my blood pressure checked. She knew when the dog next door kept digging under my fence. She knew when I switched to peppermint tea at night because coffee had started keeping me up too late. She was not absent from my life. She was present in the way some daughters are, steadier than they get credit for, softer in style, easier to overlook beside a louder sibling who always wants to look useful. And Daniel knew that, which meant he wasn't forgetting her. He was removing her. The room felt different after that. Not louder, but tighter, as if everyone in it could sense something just slightly off, though nobody had named it yet. I heard Dr. Levin ask a few measured questions. Nothing dramatic. Where was Nina? Had anyone reached her? Was there other family? Daniel kept answering in ways that sounded cooperative while actually narrowing every possible path. She's out of state. She won't get here in time. She'd just drag this out. Drag this out. There it was again, that practical tone, that dry impatience. Not grief, not heartbreak. Efficiency, as if my life were becoming inconvenient by lasting too long. Then Nurse Tessa said she wanted to verify my contact information directly from the chart. Daniel didn't like that. You could hear it in the tiny delay before he answered. You could hear it in the little inhale he took, the one people take when they are forcing themselves not to sound defensive. "It should already be there," he said. Tessa replied, still calm, "I'd like to confirm it anyway." Then her footsteps moved away, and in that brief pocket of quiet, with the nurse out of the room and the doctor apparently checking something near the foot of my bed, Daniel stepped closer to me. I could feel him there before he spoke. Mothers know their children by presence alone. The air changes. The silence changes. When he finally leaned in, his voice dropped low enough that I think he believed only I could hear it. Or maybe he believed I couldn't hear anything at all, and he was speaking to ease his own conscience. "I'm trying to do what needs to be done, Mom." My pulse pounded in my ears. He sounded tired. Not cruel in the obvious way. That was what made it worse. He sounded like a man explaining himself to a problem. "You wouldn't have wanted this," he murmured. "Not like this." A beat passed. Then came the sentence that split everything open. "The house is already falling apart. None of this makes sense anymore." The house. Not my pain. Not my odds. Not my wishes. The house. It landed so heavily that for a second I forgot the machines, forgot the oxygen, forgot the weight in my limbs. I was back in my dining room months earlier, listening to Daniel talk about repairs I had not asked him to price, taxes I had not complained about, market timing I had not asked him to monitor. "You should sell while it still makes sense," he had said more than once. "You shouldn't leave yourself with a burden. The neighborhood's changing. Maintenance only gets harder from here." At the time, I thought he was thinking ahead for me. Now I understood he had been thinking ahead for himself. And once you see the motive, old conversations become new evidence. He had asked whether Martin left anything outside the main accounts. He had asked whether I intended to leave the house equally. He had asked whether I'd considered transferring anything early to avoid complications later. Always phrased like concern, always wrapped in helpfulness, and all the while I had been nodding, changing the subject, refusing to believe my own discomfort. Not anymore. I forced every scrap of strength I had into my right hand. A twitch. Tiny, but real. I felt it. Then I heard movement beside the bed. Nurse Tessa had come back. "I saw that," she said quietly. My whole mind latched onto those words like a rope thrown into dark water. But Daniel answered instantly, almost before she finished. "She's been having involuntary movement all morning." Involuntary. There it was again. His strategy in one word: explain away every sign of me. Tessa didn't answer right away. I could hear her watching, thinking. That silence was the first hopeful thing I had heard since waking. Not because I knew she believed me, but because she wasn't swallowing him whole. Then came another sound. Paper shifting. A keyboard tapping. Dr. Levin asking for the date on a form. Tessa read it out. And then the room went still. "The signature date," she said carefully, "is from the day after admission." Even through the fog, I understood what that meant. I had already been sedated by then, barely conscious, certainly not sitting up signing legal documents with clear intent and witnesses. No one spoke for a heartbeat. Then Dr. Levin's voice lost its softness. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I need you to step outside, right now." And for the first time since I had opened into that living nightmare, I realized something had shifted. My son was no longer the man in control of the room. He was the reason the room had become dangerous. The room changed the second the doctor told my son to step outside. Not politely, not gently, completely. One moment, Daniel had been the composed, dutiful son answering questions in a careful voice, hands full of paperwork, face arranged into that strained little mask people wear when they want credit for suffering. The next, there was a fracture in that image, a visible one. And once a crack appears in a person's story, everyone starts seeing the lines they missed before. "What?" Daniel said. Not sad, not shocked, offended. That single note in his voice sent a chill through me because it sounded less like a son worried for his mother and more like a man irritated that his transaction had been interrupted. Dr. Levin did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Outside," he repeated. "Now." Daniel pushed back immediately. He said this was ridiculous. He said there had to be some clerical mistake. He said he was only trying to honor my wishes. He even let a little hurt creep into his tone, as if he were the one being treated unfairly. It was clever. It might have worked too, if Nurse Tessa hadn't already disturbed the neat little picture he'd painted. Because now there were too many things hanging in the air. The wrong signature date, the missing emergency contact, the speed with which he had tried to limit my treatment, the way he kept speaking over everyone else. He was no longer grieving family. He was a problem. His footsteps retreated at last, sharp and reluctant, and then the door opened and closed. The silence that followed felt different from the earlier silence. Not empty, alert. The kind of silence that means people are finally paying attention. Then hands touched mine, firm, professional, human. "Mrs. Cole," someone said close to my ear, "if you can hear me, I need you to try to respond." My name. Not the patient. Not she. My name. You do not realize how powerful that is until you have spent what feels like an eternity lying still while people talk over your body as if you are already halfway gone. My name brought me back to myself. I dragged in a shallow breath. The effort felt enormous. My whole body seemed made of wet sand and iron. Every attempt to move sent exhaustion flooding through me. But now there was purpose in the room. The doctor was no longer asking my son what to do. He was asking me to come back and prove I was still here. "Flora," Nurse Tessa said, "can you squeeze my hand?" Simple question, one impossible task. I tried immediately and got nothing. Panic flashed hot through me. What if I was too late? What if my mind was awake, but my body would not cooperate fast enough to matter? What if the truth was finally close, so close, and I still couldn't reach it? Then memory broke through the fear. A month earlier, Daniel had come by on a Tuesday evening with that folder under his arm and too much energy in his voice. He had barely sat down before spreading papers across my dining table, smoothing them with both palms as if he were laying out terms for a deal. "It's just smart to update everything," he'd said. "Medical forms, property notes, access info. You don't want Nina scrambling from another state if something happens." At the time, I had noticed how neatly he had arranged the pages. Tabs, sticky notes, signature lines already marked. He had done more than gather papers. He had prepared a path. I had signed a few routine things I recognized: insurance confirmation, pharmacy release. But then I noticed another page naming a sole medical decision-maker. Daniel. No discussion, no shared authority, just his name waiting where mine should have paused longer. I remember looking up and asking, "Why is Nina not on here?" He had smiled, too fast. "Because I'm local. It's just practical." Practical. That word had become his shelter, his excuse, his disguise. I had refused to sign that page. I knew I had. I even remembered sliding it back toward him and saying I would review the rest with my attorney. The smile had slipped then, just for a second, gone almost immediately, but not gone fast enough for a mother to miss it. In the hospital bed, with Tessa's hand wrapped around mine, I finally understood why that expression had stayed with me. It had not been irritation. It had been calculation interrupted. "Flora," Dr. Levin said, closer now, "if you understand me, squeeze once for yes." Everything narrowed. The room, the machines, the ache in my chest, the pressure in my skull, all of it reduced to one command, one answer, one chance. I reached for my body the way you reach through dark water for the surface, slow, blind, desperate. Then, there. A faint tightening of my fingers around hers, So slight, I nearly thought I imagined it. But Tessa reacted instantly. I felt that. My pulse hammered. I gathered every thread of strength still left in me. Again, she said, louder this time, and there was something in her voice now, something no one had given me yet. Belief. I squeezed again. This time, there was no hesitation in the room. Someone moved quickly to the monitors. Someone else called for another staff member to witness. Dr. Levin's voice changed from cautious to decisive in a single breath. No treatment limitations, he said. Not until we complete direct assessment, contact administration, and get social work involved. From the hallway, Daniel's voice rose, muffled but sharp. What's happening? What are you doing? No one answered him immediately, and that silence, that beautiful silence, told me more than words could have. Then another detail surfaced. One final thread tugged loose from the paperwork. Nurse Tessa compared the form again to the chart and said the witness name on the proxy belonged to a staff member who hadn't even been on shift that day. Not confusion. Not bad timing. Fraud. The word wasn't spoken yet, but it filled the room all the same. Then, just when I thought my heart could not take another shock, I heard fast footsteps in the corridor. A woman's voice. Breathless. Panicked. Furious. Nina. "Where is my mother?" she shouted. "And what did my brother do?" And lying there, too weak to lift my head, but finally no longer alone inside the truth, I knew the next few minutes would decide everything. The first full sentence I spoke after they stabilized me was only 3 words. I heard him. That was all I had. My throat was raw. My chest felt scraped hollow. My body still seemed to belong to the bed more than to me. But those 3 words changed the room faster than any machine ever could. Because now it was no longer a question of whether I might be aware. I was. I remember Nina reaching me first. She came to my bedside like she had been running for hours, hair loose, face pale, eyes bright with the kind of terror that leaves no room for vanity. She grabbed my hand carefully, as if she was afraid I might disappear if she held too hard, and said, Mom, I'm here." I tried to turn my head toward her. It took effort, but I did it. That alone made her burst into tears. There is a particular kind of grief that comes when relief and horror arrive together. That was what I saw in her face. Relief that I was alive. Horror at how close the situation had come to turning into something else. Dr. Aaron Levin stood at the foot of the bed, no longer uncertain. Calm, yes, but changed. Nurse Tessa Morales remained beside me, one hand still lightly touching my blanket, as if she did not want me to feel alone for even a second. There were more people in the room now, too, an administrator, another nurse, eventually a social worker. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Nobody was discussing my decline anymore. They were discussing what had been done around me. Dr. Levin explained it carefully, probably because he could see I was still weak, and because some truths need to be handed to a person gently, even when they are ugly. No treatment had been fully withdrawn. Nothing irreversible had happened, but Daniel had attempted to direct the course of my care using paperwork that now appeared invalid. He had pushed for my treatment to be limited while I was unable to communicate clearly, and he had presented himself as my sole medical decision-maker without lawful authority. I closed my eyes for a second when I heard that. Not because I didn't understand, because I did. That was the logical center of everything, finally stripped clean. Daniel had not made a confused mistake in the middle of a painful emergency. He had moved quickly, deliberately, and with paperwork ready because he wanted control before I woke up and corrected him. The forms were reviewed right there and then, and more thoroughly later. My real signature had been lifted from earlier routine documents and copied onto a medical proxy form I had never approved. The date on the form placed it after my hospital admission, when I had already been sedated and in no condition to knowingly sign anything. The witness line named a hospital staff member who had not even been working that shift. Nina had been omitted from the emergency contact section Daniel had submitted, despite being listed in older records. Every major question that had hung over the day now had an answer, and every answer pointed in the same direction. He had tried to build a legal-looking path around my voice. Nina looked at me after the explanation, her jaw tight, tears still running down her cheeks. "I told them you would never agree to that," she said. "I told them none of it sounded right." I squeezed her hand the best I could. Across the room, through the partly open door, I caught a glimpse of Daniel speaking with security and hospital administration. His face had lost that smooth composure. He looked angry now, cornered, exposed. And yet, when they finally let him speak to me briefly, under supervision, he still tried to hold on to the same story. "Mom," he said, "I was trying to do what was best." No apology first. "No, I'm sorry. No, I panicked. Just justification." His voice shook, but not from grief, from pressure, from the collapse of a plan he had not expected anyone to interrupt. "I thought you were suffering," he said. "I thought you wouldn't want all this dragged out." I stared at him for a long moment, gathering enough breath to answer. "You were not trying to save me from pain," I said. "You were trying to get there before I woke up." The whole room went still. That was the emotional breaking point, not because I shouted, but because I didn't. There was no dramatic scream, no wild accusation, just truth, spoken plainly by the person he had counted on silencing. Daniel's face changed when I said it. Something hard in him faltered, not all the way into remorse, but enough to show that he knew I had seen through him completely. What came next mattered just as much as the reveal. Security escorted him from the floor when he began arguing with the administrator. The hospital filed an internal incident report. Social work documented the suspected coercion and possible elder abuse concerns. Adult Protective Services was contacted. So was law enforcement, because the issue had crossed out of family conflict and into possible fraud involving medical authority. No one promised me dramatic instant justice, and that made it feel more real. Investigations take time. Documents get reviewed. Statements get compared. But the important thing was that his actions did not disappear into a private family wound. They became part of a record. That mattered. My treatment continued. The infection that had brought me there was serious, but now it was being treated without anyone standing over my bed, trying to edit my future. As I became clearer, more details surfaced. Daniel's contracting business had not merely slowed, it was failing. He had taken on private debt I never fully knew about. He had been counting on my house, its sale, its equity, its predictability, as something he could eventually access or influence. Worse, he had recently learned enough to suspect I was reviewing my estate plans. He may not have known the exact details, but he knew change was coming, and that frightened him. Because I had been planning to meet with my attorney, Evelyn Price, age 61, the week after I collapsed. Not to punish him, not to cut him out in anger, to protect both my children from exactly this kind of pressure. I intended to place my estate in a trust, appoint neutral oversight, and make sure no one could corner me in a moment of weakness. I never got the chance before the hospital, but I got it after. Once I was stable enough, Nina brought Evelyn to see me. We updated everything, every document, every emergency contact, every medical directive. Nina became my primary contact, and a licensed fiduciary was added for any major financial decisions. Daniel was removed from every role that depended on trust, because trust was the one thing he had spent. There were personal consequences too, and they were not neat. Nina took leave from work and stayed with me through the rest of my hospital recovery. I saw the toll it took on her exhaustion, her anger, the grief of realizing her brother had done exactly what she had feared, and worse. She was vindicated, yes, but vindication can be a lonely comfort when it arrives wrapped in betrayal. Daniel's teenage son, Eli, 16 years old, became another quiet casualty in all this. He did not hear every detail immediately, and I made sure of that, because children should not be used as weapons in adult ruin. But he heard enough to know something had broken badly. A grandfather's watch, a family gathering, a holiday invitation. Small things started shifting around him. That is how damage spreads, not always through courtroom scenes, sometimes through empty chairs in ordinary rooms. As for me, I did go home. Not quickly, and not unchanged. The body heals on one schedule, the mind on another. For weeks after the hospital, certain sounds made my heart jump. A rolling cart in a hallway, the clipped beep of a monitor on television, even the rustle of papers near my bed. Waking in the dark was the worst. There were nights when I would sit upright, hand on my chest, hearing Daniel's voice in memory saying, "Stop the treatment!" and feel that same cold helplessness all over again. The hospital social worker had suggested trauma counseling, and for once in my life, I did not resist the idea of help. I went. It helped. Not in a dramatic movie-like way, just honestly, slowly, like someone opening a stuck window 1 inch at a time. Socially, the family map redrew itself. Relatives who had always described Daniel as the dependable one became quieter around that word. Some reached out to Nina with awkward apologies. A few tried to smooth it over, saying stress makes people do terrible things. Maybe it does, but stress does not forge signatures. Stress does not erase a daughter from the contact list. Stress does not lean over a living woman and talk about her house while she lies unable to speak. Character does that. In the months that followed, I made practical changes too. Real ones. I stopped pretending age alone was the danger. Vulnerability without protection was the danger. I learned my own documents thoroughly. I kept copies where I could access them, and where trusted people could too. I made my wishes clear in writing and in conversation, not because I was giving up control, but because I was taking it back. Daniel eventually contacted me, not in person, a letter first, then a voicemail. The letter was full of strained language about pressure, misunderstanding, impossible circumstances. He said he had been overwhelmed, said he thought he was acting responsibly, said he hoped one day I would see that he never meant to hurt me. But intent is a luxury for the person who acts. For the person trapped beneath the act, consequences are what count. I answered once, by phone. My voice was steadier than I expected. I told him that forgiveness and access were not the same thing. I told him I would not let him near my decisions, my documents, or my home again. I told him he had mistaken my age for weakness and my love for permission. Then I ended the call. The final change in my life was not loud. It was quiet, almost ordinary, which is how real endings usually arrive. A few months after I came home, I was sitting in my chair by the front window in the late afternoon, a cup of tea cooling beside me. Sunlight stretched across the rug. The new legal papers were organized in a folder on the side table, not hidden, not vague, not waiting for someone else to interpret them. Nina was in the kitchen, close enough for me to hear her humming while she washed fruit. Outside, the garden looked a little wild, but alive. So was I. That day, I understood something I wish I had learned sooner. It was not old age that nearly erased me. It was silence. Other people's convenience. Other people's assumptions. Other people's willingness to speak over a woman once she looked weak enough to be managed. But I was still there. Still awake. Still listening. Still able, in the end, to tell the truth before someone else buried it for me. And that truth changed everything.